Welcome to lesson 4 about the formulator of logic of our course on logic or mantiq. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma akhrijna min zulumatil wahm wa akrimna bi nuril fahm. Allahumma aftah alayna abwaab rahmatik وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين. So before we proceed to the actual lesson, let's have a quick summary of the previous lesson. Lesson 3 on the usage and definition of logic as instrumental science. The usage of logic is that it makes the mind immune from the mistake in thinking through the rules and from committing wrong in gaining mental unknown. Number 2, logic is one of the instrumental sciences because if there were no other rational sciences like philosophy and others, there would have been no place for logic. Number 3, logic, therefore, is an instrumental science, and all other sciences which use logical rules are accounted as fundamental sciences in relation to logic. Number 4, after having familiarity with some of the characteristics of logic, we can define it as follows. Logic is an instrumental science that indicates the rules of definition and argumentation, and considering its rule, the mind would be safe from any mistake. Now, after having this quick summary of the previous lesson, let us properly deal with the lesson at hand on the formulator of logic. So we will touch upon inherent logic and organized logic, the formulator of logic, and dispelling a doubt. Inherent logic and organized logic. First of all, it must be mentioned that the rules of logic used for correct reflection are not merely devised and formulated, but indicate the quality of the intellectual process and the mind's attempt to make known the unknown, or what we call as majhulat. In other words, logic is not entirely prescriptive, or what we call as dasturi, but in fact talks about the facts existing in man's mind and intellect. And for this reason, logic is accounted as a descriptive, or what we call in Arabic as tawsifi science, and not a prescriptive one. Not dasturi, but tawsifi. The human mind acts in a distinctive manner genetically, and in its action, it does not follow other assumed laws and commands, but goes on along the natural path based on a God-given way. This natural path is a logical path, and this is what is meant by inherent logic, or what we call as mantiqi takwini, or ontological logic. The birth of inherent logic, therefore, coincides with man's beginning, or Genesis. But organizing and systematizing these rules and classifying them in the form of organized logic took place many years after the creation of man, and it has a specific history. As such, although the birth of the science of logic as an organized set came much later than the genesis of thinking and the rational man, it does not mean that man's mind acted illogically before this time, and suddenly, by the organization of logic by a certain person, all minds obeyed his instructions in order to act logically. It's not so. The formulator of logic. Scholars of logic know Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, as the formulator of logic. He wrote and compiled logic in the 4th century BCE in response to the request of Alexander of Macedonia. For this reason, among the ancients, logic is known as the heritage of Alexander. For example, Hakim Sabsewari says in his Manzumeye Mantiq, the sage Aristotle compiled it. It's the bequest of Alexander. Al-Fahul Rakim Rastalis Mirath Dhil Qarnayn al-Qadis. Some people have presumed that the compilation of logic was basically not done by Aristotle, but it was done earlier by Oriental scholars, particularly the Persians. Then, during Persia's conquest by Alexander, books on logic and other scientific works were taken to Greece. Dispelling a doubt. Some groups or schools of thought condemn Islamic sciences, Islamic philosophy in particular, for being based on the Aristotelian logic, saying that what does this mushrik's idea do with us, they say. It is said that Aristotelian logic is subjective and disparages experiments and examinations. Moreover, Aristotle was not a Muslim. Therefore, Aristotelian logic, accordingly, cannot be accounted as a basis for Islamic thought and philosophy. Here's the reply. First, it is not true that in Islamic philosophy, any speech from Aristotle or any other scholar is acceptable without any definite proof and reason. That is one. Second, at the beginning, the subjects of logic, which were compiled by Aristotle, had numerous types of flaws and imperfections. Later, those defects were gradually removed by succeeding authorities, including Muslim philosophers. Thirdly, today, logical debates are not merely subjective, but rather empirical and inductive methods have been introduced to find some facts. Fourthly, as stated before, Aristotle is not the formulator of logic, but he was just the pioneering founder of logical rules for man's intellect. These rules have been given to man inherently by God the Most High. Therefore, if today our philosophy is based on logic, this logic is in fact a God-given inherent logic and not Aristotelian logic per se. Of course, since Aristotle has established the rules and compiled them, logic is attributed to him. That's very natural. But it must be said that in reality it is Allah and not Aristotle who is the formulator of logic. It is he who instilled it upon the human being. So that's all about lesson 4 on the formulator of logic. So for review questions, or I would even say prelectio questions, first, the question is, what are inherent and organized logic? Number 2, who is the formulator of logic? Number 3, is Islamic logic subjective? If it is, why? If it is not, why? Okay, so that's all about the review questions, or I would even say prelectio questions. So as a practical exercise, let's have this one. In solving a mathematical problem, describe the manner of your mental processing. So next meeting, we will also deal with the succeeding lesson, which is about a discussion on expressions or alfāẓ in logic. For more similar contents, subscribe to Wayfaring with Mansoor channel. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.